Wowie wow! We've got a new hot sauce for you.
It's so delicious.
It's spicy.
It's spicier for sure.
Spicier. It's called Harvest Moon, made with ghost peppers, American persimmons,
and spice bush berry.
It's gonna be great. We also have t-shirts available. Brand new t-shirts.
The best t-shirts, I think.
Baseball tees.
Scrumpers United.
If you've collected apples, if you've collected fruit, you're
welcome to the club.
You're welcome to a club. You're a scrumper. So check out our merch store, wildedible.worldpod.myshopify.com. Wowie wow! It's time to thaw out, y'all. It's another episode of the Wild Edible World podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Michael.
And I am Steve, the other host of the Wild Edible World podcast. Welcome, guys. Like Michael said, it's a little bit chilly outside, but we're cooking in here. We have Mr. David Hughes on the line.
Yes,
welcome,
of
welcome.
Rockbridge Trees down in Tennessee. Yes, thank you so much for being here, David.
Well, thank you for having me on, and you sent your wretched winter weather down here to the sunny south, and we would like for you to take it back.
What are you working with down there? What's the temperature?
We have somewhere between 6 and 8 inches of snow right now, and 12 degrees for a high today.
Oh, wow.
And that just ain't right down here.
Yeah, right. 12 degrees. Jeez, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I'd trade you in a second. We're in the negatives, but yeah, that's probably a little bit unseasonal for you, huh? I mean, yeah, probably a little out of the ordinary, even for winter.
It happens down here, and on a regular basis. I mean, we had some zero last year, and we normally get it, but we don't get the snow, and we don't have any way to do anything with it when we do get it. So it is just a big, giant, colossal mess down here. So
nice.
But I admire the way that you handle snow in the north, and I wish it would stay up there where you can handle it. So.
Yeah, no kidding. We definitely got a few inches plopped on us a few weeks, or like within a week ago. So. Yeah, we're taking it back, and we're in the process of.
Yeah, we're trying to get it back. Don't worry, we'll be there for long.
We're going to give it a good push here in a day or two when it thaws a little.
Nice. So you're down in Tennessee working with several native, North American native crops, trees, specializing in pecans. But this is a foraging show, so before we get into all that, I definitely want to hear a little bit about some of the plants that you've interacted with in the wild. We like to ask all of our guests, like, what's the first plant that you, or berry or fruit or anything that you remember foraging?
Well, probably the first thing that I remember that was wild that I remember us gathering and eating was what we call crazy greens down here in the South, which is landcress or wild landcress. And I was with my folks when I was a kid, and we were visiting some folks, and we all kind of went out in an old cornfield and started gathering these greens, and they cooked them up. And it was a traditional southern Appalachian wild food that people gathered, in their farm fields in the off season, the wintertime. Stays green most of the winter down here, and it's just something that I don't know, most people haven't even seen anymore, and I've got it growing here there on my farm even right now. So it's a little buried under the snow right now, but it's still there. It's still green.
Do you still eat it?
I do when I can find enough of it to make a mess. It's just kind of scattered one here and one there. It takes several plants to make, it's green, so it cooks down. But, it's got a very pleasant taste. It's mild, a little bit of a peppery zing to it.
Sounds
And
great.
it's a really cool plant. It's easy to recognize, and it's one of the better things out there. And then I've been in my dad hunted and fished a lot, and we were out in the outdoors all the time, and berries and nuts and persimmons and things like that were, you gathered those as you found them. I guess probably the thing that we as a family liked as much as anything was in West Tennessee, there were wild muscadines, and we would gather buckets of those things and bring them home and coerce my mom into making muscadine jelly out of them.
That's awesome.
But that's wild foods have been a thing for me for a long time, and are becoming more and more a thing for me as I get older. I think it's a great unknown in the culinary world. I think that there's a good deal of interest in it among professional chefs and things in using wild foods, and I think we've got a lot of things that were once cultivated that need to be revived. They've got good health qualities, food qualities. They're good for you. They're actually fairly easy to grow. They're native. They know how to grow here.
Yeah, a lot of the times that these super flavorful, super medicinal plants are growing whether people want them or not. So, you almost can't help them, or you can't stop them from growing. So,
yeah, that and then we don't have even though we're an agricultural nation, I tell people from time to time that we conquered North America, but we never really settled it because we have not learned to cultivate what was here. And so there's all kinds of things that we look at as weeds that are perfectly edible. Some of them, at certain seasons. But, I have people ask me for poke salad all the time, and the first thing I do is ask them if they know how to fix it, and if they don't know how to fix it, I don't send it to them because they'll kill somebody if they don't know how to prepare it properly.
No kidding, yeah.
And but it is, poke salad is really, really good if you know how to cook it. But there's just all this stuff. I mean, we're growing Jerusalem artichokes here on the farm as a crop, and ground nuts, Apios americana.
Oh my God!
Growing those as a
Yeah, I saw the picture of the ground nuts on the Rockbridge Trees Instagram.
Insane.
Ground nuts the size of your fist.
Yeah, I saw those.
Yeah, that's what they call the mother tuber. That's the 2-year-old tuber, and 2 or 3 years old, and that is that one is not the most edible one because it gets woody when it gets huge like that. But the smaller tubers about the size of an egg or so, those are delightful. That's the ones you want to eat.
What
but
would
you can dig the and take that big tuber and put it in a pot, and next year you'll have those egg-sized ones again.
What would you describe the flavor as?
Well, it's kind of nutty. It's a kind of a mild flavor, kind of a nutty potato flavor.
I'm in.
They can be like the Jerusalem artichoke. They can be a little gassy. The guys that I know who make a habit of eating some of these things is the key to it is cooking them longer than you would a potato. So if you cook them 20, 30 minutes, whether you're boiling them or whatnot, that does away with some of the gassiness.
Sure.
And, also limiting intake. Don't eat. I had a guy said, hey, I ate a big plateful of those things. And I'm like, well, how much did you eat? And he's like, well, I ate a whole plateful. And I was like, well, you nearly exploded. And it was, you don't, a serving size is an ounce or so, especially when you first try these things. And it should be that way with any kind of native food is to try it first and see how you, number one, whether you like it, and number two, how your body reacts to it. There's a lot of things that are just pretty generic. I mean, I don't know that a lot of people are allergic to blackberries, but if you go to eating the leaves, which are perfectly edible, you might ought to take a little care as to how many of those you eat. So, I mean, there's all this stuff out there that was regionally available. Y'all are in an area that was prairie. There were all kinds of prairie wildflowers that made tubers that were edible. There were all kinds of leaves and tops and things that were edible, and we just don't. I mean, those things aren't hardly in existence anymore, so we don't really know they're there.
Sure. Yeah, I've been doing a bit of research on things like honey locust and how that was a crop for indigenous people. I'm not sure which specific tribe. I mean, people always want to say like Cherokee, but that can often be like a generalization. But it was cultivated. It was a purposed crop. And it still can be. It's just that practice has been completely done away with and then replaced with stuff that doesn't even know how to grow here, like I think you were saying earlier. And something like honey locust, there's almost no writing whatsoever on the depth to which it was used. And from what I could find, it was basically like a panacea. You could use it for coughs, for sick children. You could use it to make fermented alcoholic beverages. You can make it. It tastes good. The seeds were edible. I mean, it was good construction wood, good bow wood. I mean, it's just so underutilized, and add that to the list of highly underutilized trees here in North America. One of the other ones I feel strongly about being like hickory nuts and the hickory trees in general.
Oh yeah, well hickories is kind of my niche in the world. I've got close to 40 different kinds of thin-shelled hickories here right now that are in my nursery, and there are lots and lots and lots of hickories out there. Have you ever tried hickory milk?
Oh yeah, I've had. I think Sam Thayer made it at the one of the foragers events, like gatherings. Basically, it's the simplest way to get that flavor. You just crush it all up and sort it. Make sure you don't put any bad nuts in there, because like a single bad nut will make you sick. And then you boil it, and bada bing, bada boom. All the solids kind of fall. You skim off the top. Delicious.
Sounds awesome.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and that was a primary way that the natives ate that, is they didn't sit around and tediously pick out those little nut meats out of those nuts. But what they did do, though, is they selected the better trees and planted nuts from the better trees near their encampments, so that they had nuts that had a higher kernel content than just a generic wild hickory nut.
Sure.
And one of the things that they're finding, the shellbark hickory, which is the king nut hickory, which is the big giant nuts the size of a walnut, they're finding in New England, in the valleys of the Appalachians in southern New England, so in Pennsylvania and New York and over into New Jersey, northern Virginia and whatnot, which is actually outside the native range of the shellbark hickory.
Wow.
If you find a shellbark hickory, it has a much better chance of having a thin shell and a nicer kernel than down here in the South where they're native. And it was because the natives carried those nuts with them back to from here to there, and planted these improved nuts. And it's the same way that they cultivated corn and selected corn. The original corn was a grass that made a couple of kernels on the plant, and we turned it into what it is now. They were doing the same thing with hickory trees. They were selecting for the better qualities, the higher oil content, the higher kernel percentage, the thinner shell, because they wanted to use it in other ways other than just crush the nuts and boil them. And the only way to do that is to have a nut that you can crack out and have the nut meats fall free from the kernel, from the shell.
Sure.
Mm.
And black walnuts were selected the same way. And there was an area of indigenous habitation in Alabama called Moccasin Bend, and there was a battle there. Andrew Jackson had a battle down there and wiped out a lot of people down there. But they did a botanic survey of that bend. It's a bend in the Alabama River. It's almost completely cut off. But they did a botanical survey of that some time ago, and there are more species of American plums. So American plum, Chickasaw plum, goose plum, all of these other native plums in that one bend of the river than anywhere else in one place in the United States.
That's incredible.
Wow.
Sounds awesome.
And that is because those things were gathered by the natives and planted there in orchards, just like, we would plant a peach orchard. They had plum thickets that they planted, and they planted them so they could have the plums there for them to use, for their villages and cities and whatnot. So, we've got this vision that, we came across the ocean, and here were all these people who didn't know how to do anything. They were just, as we referred to them as wild Indians. Well, they had a very developed culture, and they had a very developed agriculture, but it didn't look like European agriculture, so we didn't recognize it as agriculture. Mm-hmm. And they were in the way, so we killed them off, and we ignored their culture, and we ignored their agriculture, and brought a bunch of stuff here that doesn't live very well here. And
or lives
now
too
we're
well.
trying to force it here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's fighting us tooth and toenail.
Mm-hmm. It's making it worse for us and the rest of the ecosystem. It's showing in our forestry practices as well, with all these increased wildfires, and it's definitely a domino effect.
We're still practicing an extractive agriculture.
Exactly.
And when you stop trying to maximize everything you can take and begin to figure out what the optimum is that you can take, then you get to a point where, hey, we can actually have our profit and actually have a better place next year than we started with. And your honey locust is an example. The honey locust is a great silvopasture crop. It works well with livestock. Mm-hmm. The cattle can eat the pods. People can eat the pods.
The foliage.
The foliage is edible. If you select varieties that don't have thorns, and most of the improved varieties don't have thorns, you don't have to worry about that part. And the cattle actually produce more weight when they can stand in the shade in the heat of the day.
Hey,
and awesome. I'm more comfortable if I don't stand in the sun at noon.
Yeah,
sure.
So, if you've got a place where they can go stand in the shade, they will go stand in the shade, and the foliage is light enough that grass will grow underneath the tree, and the tree produces nitrogen, so you get a good stand of grass. It's a win-win. Absolutely is a win-win. And some of these varieties that were selected by Hershey when he was doing his research for TVA for the tree crops produced 30% sugar.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you can actually, it's a relative of carob, and we are familiar with carob in our culinary culture. You take the pods and you scrape the goo out of them, and you cook it down a little bit, and you can make sugar out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt of that. The research I was doing showed that there were rates of anywhere between 16 to 34% sugar in collected pods in the wild. So that cultivation culture has kind of gone away, but those trees have continued breeding and hybridizing with other wild trees and then creating like more kind of high content sugar or high sugar content trees. The ones that we have in here in Chicago, I believe, are remnants perhaps of cultivars because they are so sweet, they're so delicious, and you can squeeze the pods. They're like soft with goo on the inside. So, and then I talk to other people who live obviously in other parts of the country, and they say they taste bad or they're bitter or there's hardly any goo on the inside that's worth working with, and that is just not what I experience here. So I think those are like clear results of intentional breeding outside of European hands.
And that's even intentional from how many years since they've actually been encouraged.
Exactly. Yeah. Hundreds.
So if you find them here,
that is if you go and forage in an area near where there was an intense native habitation. So if there's an area where there were mounds, or if there's a place where that there were a lot of Native Americans, if you will forage in those areas, you will find that the plants that are there, even though they have been out of cultivation and have been the environment has been somewhat abused, you will find that the quality of the plants that are there are still better than the quality of the plants that are just out away from those areas.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. And the Chicago area, I think, is a very great example of that because as metropolitan as it is, I think people easily forget how high of a population of indigenous people were here before colonization and are still here afterwards. And the biodiversity, I think, of the Great Lakes area really, really reflects that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we keep this up, we may someday again be Native Americans. But right now, we're still the conquering masses, and we, I don't mean to sound like I don't appreciate the culture that we have, but it is somewhat. We've just got to get over this conquering mindset and learn to work with the land that we have, because we're wiping it out and we're subdividing it and building houses on it and so on and so forth. And I'm not anti-agriculture. I participate in agriculture, but there is and has been for some time now ways to improve agriculture.
And there's always been
make
agriculture.
It a little bit, make it just a little bit more culture and a little less extractive.
Love it.
Nice.
So, it's, I don't know, people may not like me for all this, but it is, I've got a little tiny 8.5 acre place here, and I've been making a living on it for 25 years here by growing things that people want and by not abusing the place. So that's, it's possible to do this. You just have to, it's kind of intentional farming. You do it on purpose, not because the neighbors are doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly my neighbors don't think I'm farming.
I'm sure they don't.
They look at me and go, "Why is he doing all that stuff?"
So let's talk about a little bit about some of the projects you're most excited about on your farm.
Well, the nut trees and edible, trees that produce edible crops. So we do pecans, we do hickories, we do hicons, which is a hybrid between a pecan and a hickory. We have some hazelnuts that have been bred by Rutgers University to be productive in the east and resistant to filbert blight.
Excellent.
And produce a commercial size hazelnut. We're doing some mulberries. We're doing some persimmons. We're doing some pawpaws. What all else is out there? There's just all kinds of stuff we're doing. Pecans is what I really started out to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my focus is northern pecans. There are people growing pecans as far north as you, just near Chicago.
Sure.
I've seen those are referred to as ultra northern pecans. They're usually fairly small, but they do produce an edible nut, and lots of them. But my focus has been to produce these nuts that are viable outside the pecan belt. So there's plenty of trees in South Georgia and Texas and Louisiana and down in the areas where they grow pecans as a crop. Mm-hmm. But the trees that are adapted to even my part of the country are just, there's nobody growing them. And, the rootstocks that you need that are resistant to the cold that we're having right now, if you took a pecan tree from a nursery in Georgia and you took it to Chicago, it would now be a popsicle and deader than a doornail in the springtime because it can't hold. Yeah. And there are pecans growing wild along the Mississippi River in northern Iowa all the way to the Wisconsin border. And those trees are cold hardy, and you can use those as a rootstock. And some of these varieties, and that is another thing. Because y'all are foragers, most of the nuts that are named, if they don't have a Native American name, they are very likely just wild seedlings that people collected and gave a name and propagated.
That's awesome.
So, Major is a pecan from the mouth of the Green River in Kentucky that is actually a bitternut pecan hybrid. It's actually a hicon.
Cool.
And it makes a very flavorful, high oil content nut. It's not very big. It's not what we would consider a jumbo, but it is. People in Kentucky will walk past a big bin full of great big pecans to get those majors because they taste so good. And that tree was growing in a river bottom and on Mr. Major's farm, and somebody recognized it as an excellent pecan, and they started propagating it sometime in the early 1900s.
That's so cool.
Now it is all over the country as a northern pecan.
Wow.
There was a fellow in southern Indiana named Ed Yates who bred some pecans. He crossed Major with some other varieties. There's one called Posey that came from Posey County, Indiana. Well, let's see. What are the others? There's one named Deer Stand that came out of Missouri because it was growing next to a deer stand.
Oh, you don't say.
Probably could have guessed that one.
Yeah.
There's one named Goose Pond that was growing next to a goose pond. Those are all of those that are just have peculiar names that are not Native American names are just wild trees that were identified as good trees, and people propagated them, grafted them, and spread them around.
That's so cool.
Nice.
These states have got nut grower organizations, and if anybody's interested in this, they need to join these nut grower organizations because they're filled with old guys who have trees who have a lot of knowledge about this, and we need a younger generation to take up this banner and move forward because it's going to disappear. All the things that we talk about amongst Native Americans, losing that culture, we're losing our nut culture altogether in modern society because we think somebody else will take care of it. And plant a couple of trees wherever you are. And, I keep hearing people say, hey, I'm going to move in a few years. I don't want to plant a tree that somebody else is going to get the benefit from. Well, if you plant one and the next guy plants one and the next guy plants one, eventually when you move to your new place, there's going to be a tree waiting for you.
Sigh.
Well, what's wrong, buddy?
Well, I just realized this mushroom supplement I bought isn't actually made with mushrooms. It's made with something called myceliated grain?
Myceliated grain?
Oh, no!
I'm sorry to tell you, buddy, but myceliated grain is a sure sign of a poor quality mushroom supplement.
Well, dang. I wanted mushrooms, not brown rice. What should I do?
Well, you should support a small batch producer from right here in the Midwest. Keweenaw Apothecary.
Keweenaw Apothecary? Tell me more.
Keweenaw Apothecary specializes in high-quality mushroom extracts from Michigan, and they always use real mushrooms, never myceliated grain.
That sounds like exactly what I've been looking for. Where can I order?
Well, you can find them at keweenawapothecary.etsy.com. That's KEWEENAW apothecary.etsy.com. Be sure to read their many excellent reviews.
Thanks, buddy. I don't want no low-quality mushroom products from a factory. I want Keweenaw Apothecary.
Wowie wow! Wowie wow! We've got a new hot sauce for you.
It's so delicious.
It's spicy.
It's spicier for sure.
Spicier. It's called Harvest Moon, made with ghost peppers, American persimmons,
and spice bush berry.
It's gonna be great. We also have t-shirts available. Brand new t-shirts.
The best t-shirts, I think.
Baseball tees.
Scrumpers United.
If you've collected apples, if you've collected fruit,
welcome to the club.
You're welcome to a club. You're a scrumper. So check out our merch store, wildedibleworldpod.myshopify.com. Wowie wow!
Yeah, absolutely, and that shouldn't be your motivation for improving the biodiversity.
Yeah, how
and
can I benefit?
Food availability is like, well, how can I get it?
Yeah, well, it's. Hey, look, it's. None of this is about us.
Right.
It's about. We all want to talk about all these ethereal concepts of agriculture and culture and such. Well, the most important thing you can do is do something.
True
And
that.
if you got a place, I don't care if you're renting. If they'll let you plant a hickory tree or a pecan tree in the yard, plant one. And someday somebody will benefit from it. And maybe you'll get to come back and see it. I see stuff I planted, years ago in other people's places all the time.
Yeah.
People have been buying trees from me now for about 15 years. Well, some of those trees are pretty big now.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool to buy and go, oh, look, those came from here.
Well, and I think a lot of people would be surprised if they took the time to try to find some of these similar, like, nut growing organizations, or even in the Chicago area, the park districts. Just the county park districts are like begging you to take oak, hickory, pecan seedlings, elderberry, all sorts of fruit producing, nut producing, good for the wildlife, good for you, plants and trees and stuff for free. You just have to show up. And so I participated in a lot of that this year for my own nursery, and also just trying to spread the wealth, get as many of them and give them to as many people as I could that were interested, that might not have the mobility that I do. But it's also very cool to hear about different places that sell specific cultivars. So you have a nursery, right, where you sell a bunch of different varieties of delicious edible pecans. You sell like seedlings and grafted products, or?
I just sell grafted trees. You can get seedlings in lots of places, and I sell grafted trees, and I will sell graft wood to people of the varieties that are big enough to cut wood from here. Mm-hmm. If you want to graft on trees, And that is, that is the thing about pecans and hickories. Sometimes they come close to the same, but you got to remember that these trees are wind pollinated, so we know who the mother is, but we never know who the father is. And the father might be the really good tree next to it, and it may be the real skanky tree down the road. So we just don't know who the male parent is on any of these trees, and it appears that some varieties of hickories come fairly close to. No, they wouldn't, not really true to type, but they come close to the parent. Pecans are not nearly that good. You plant 1,000 seeds and grow them up to be 20 years old, and there may be one or two in there that are good, and there may not be any that are good. So the best way to get a good nut and to get it sooner is to plant a seedling, let it get up about thumb size or so, and then get a stick of graft wood from something that you do know produces nut and graft it onto that. And that's a whole other. We can have a whole long talk about grafting sometime.
Yeah, I think we should, honestly.
Actually, that'd be great. We'd love to have you back on and focus on just grafting styles, types.
It's a whole. I mean, it's a whole almost lost art. I mean, that is actually what we have decided in the last couple of years in our nursery is that our focus needs to be on grafted varieties, mainly because there's so few people grafting, and there's so few nurseries that graft. They just want to grow the same stuff that everybody else grows and try to make it all up on volume. And it's having these unique characteristics and whatnot. We've got a hickory that was named in the late 1800s called Sales Paper Shell. It was the first one that was grafted, and I hope we can get some more wood to it this year. I've got a tree growing here, but it's tiny still. But that tree, my friend Zach Elfers over in Pennsylvania, there are only maybe still 3 mature trees that we know of in the world.
Oh, wow.
And that is, when we're talking about biodiversity and maintaining cultivars and so on and so forth, I mean, pecans are like trying to find old heirloom apples. I mean, they're even harder because they're so, somebody grew one. A guy gave me a stick of a pecan from Kentucky called Rambo. And I don't know that anybody, but he and maybe 2 other people in the world know anything about the Rambo pecan, but it's a disease-resistant pecan. It's been around in Kentucky for 60 or 70 years. And I mean, it's just an unknown, and your people who want to go out and forage all along the rivers in the Mississippi Valley, there are wild groves of pecan trees. What river bottom is left? But fence rows, and maybe there's some trees planted in town, and there's some growing, away from the yard trees, and you go and you find those trees and you gather those nuts and you crack them out, and it's not that uncommon to find a pretty good tree. And that tree, the only way it's ever going to be reproduced is for somebody to take some wood from it and graft it onto another tree. But in the north, our best varieties are to be found. The USDA is beginning to look at growing for the northern areas, but for their history, they have grown primarily for the South and for the deep South. And they're beginning to look it up here and go, oh, wait a minute, there's a whole other part of the country where we could be growing pecans if we just had varieties that were suited for that area.
Sure. Yeah. Pecans. And I mean, yeah. And I wax wane a lot about just the usefulness of hickories and the diverse ways that we could use them, and how they're basically just America's olive tree, because the amount of oil you can produce from these nuts and the quality of that oil is like, why are we not doing this? And it's probably just out of sheer lack of people knowing. Like, not enough people know about this stuff. But I feel
probably the biggest holdback on hickory trees is that the common knowledge on hickories is, they grow so slow. Okay. Well, they don't grow that much. They take about 2 more years to make nuts than a pecan tree does. So a pecan tree makes nuts in 5 to 7 years, and a hickory tree makes nuts in 7 or 8 years. And the trees do grow fairly slow, but they live for thousands of years.
Yeah.
There's a fellow named Fred Blankenship in Kentucky who did a core sample on a tree that he named Simpson number 1, and he estimates they broke the coring tools while they were coring this hard.
Wow.
But they estimated the tree was somewhere around 600 years old.
Oh, wow.
He had a branch that blew out of this tree that he cut and counted the rings on this tree, and the branch was 200 years old.
Holy moly.
That's insane.
Just the branch.
Yeah, I'd say that's worth the extra 2 years of investment, you know?
So, when you find a big hickory tree in the woods, that tree is ancient. Okay? I mean, it may be half as big as the big red oak next to it, but it's 4 times as old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, the Simpson number 1, let me explain to you a little bit why. Now, this was not a gigantic tree. It was probably 2 feet in diameter.
Oh.
It was growing out in a field. They had cleared out around it. But it hung a crop of nuts every year that nearly broke the branches every single year.
Cool.
So the reason that tree was so old and not gigantic was because it was putting virtually all of its energy into nut production. So a tree grows and reproduces. If it is an extremely heavy bearing tree, it makes almost no extension growth whatsoever. That tree was growing 3 or 4 inches a year. Whereas an oak tree may grow 2 feet a year.
Sure.
So, your tree is, that's the nice thing about the hickories is they put a lot of effort into nut production. And if they get proper sunlight and plenty of water and so, they can cover the ground with hickory nuts. I was in an orchard this fall. It was not really just a planting, more so than an orchard. There's a shellbark hickory tree by their driveway, and it's like walking on marbles underneath that tree. The nuts literally covered the ground.
Jealous.
Cool.
And there were shagbarks down below there that were the same way. I mean, you could barely walk under the tree for all the nuts that were on the ground. And so, we really, as far as I have been able to find, no one has ever planted an actual orchard of hickory nuts for nut production. They planted trees for themselves, but no one has ever actually invested in planting improved varieties of hickories for crops of hickory nuts.
Okay. I buy like pressed hickory nut oil, and I'd be curious to know about their production, grounds, shall we say, like whether that was just like they just happened to have that many hickory trees, or if it is like, it almost can't be intentionally planted because it would have to be like tens of years old.
Those are all wild collected nuts. Now they may be in somebody's yard, or they may be in an area where they have cleared out so that they could gather the nuts,
Gotcha.
some way or another. I haven't talked to any of those guys. I know a few guys that are fooling with that, but they may have improved the collection process,
Mm-hmm.
but they've not planted those trees on purpose. Now, there are some guys who are talking about planting large plantings of hickories for oil production, but they're just now getting started.
Right. Okay.
And I think that is something that is coming, and I think it has a great deal of potential.
Mm-hmm.
But it requires people to think. We're in a culture that it's what, Monday afternoon. I would say that a large percentage of the people that you talk to on the street really don't know what they're going to do on Friday. So, to talk to somebody, even pecans reach full production at about 20 years of age. You got to think ahead. You got to think, hey, I occasionally get somebody that thinks, hey, I want to do this when I retire. What do I need to do? Well, if you're 60 already, you missed the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, you can be ready to go. It'll be showtime by the time you're ready to retire, and you can have a nice crop of something. Well, we need some guys in their 20s and 30s to plant these hickory trees and to get them up and in production. I mean, last winter I saw somebody had hickory nut meats from wild trees, not from these improved trees that crack out nice, from wild trees, and $50 a pound for shelled nuts.
Oh, wow.
And they were sold out. And
This is our calling.
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, is there economic potential to do this? Yes, there is.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a gold rush, and I don't think it's going to be a gold mine. There's work to be there's work involved in all of agriculture. I don't want to, I don't want to tell anybody that that just throw these nuts over your shoulder and the fairies will take care of them and money will pour into your bank account. That's not how it works. But if you're into trees and you think this stuff is cool and you have an interest in it, then act on it, because that's you certainly will be. Well, I'll tell you a story about chestnut trees. So this was in the early 1900s. There is an organization called the Northern Nut Growers, and that is a nationwide organization. So if you can't find your state group, then get a hold of the Northern Nut Growers and join that. And there's all kinds of over 100 years worth of journals about nut growing in that organization. But there was a guy in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County, I think, who had planted 20 acres of chestnut trees. Now, these were Chinese chestnuts, and this was about the time that the chestnut blight was wiping out the American chestnut. And his trees were about 20 years old when they interviewed him. And this is early 1900s, and off of 20 acres of chestnut trees, this guy was clearing about $30,000 a year in 1920s money, okay, which is a whole lot of money in 1920s.
That's a whole lot.
And of course, he had cities nearby. He had Philadelphia and New York and Boston. All of those were within delivery range of where he had these trees. So you've got to have a market. But they asked him, they said, hey, you're making pretty good money on these trees. Aren't you afraid your neighbors are going to, start growing these trees? And he said, well, they've been laughing at me for 20 years. He said, they're probably going to laugh at me for 20 more years before they realize that I'm onto something. And by then, it'll be too late for them, and I won't care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's so good.
The potential is there to be on the cutting edge of tree crops, and whether it's nut trees, whether it's hickories or pecans or hazelnuts or chestnuts or any of these things, the market is wide open. There is no supply. We import millions of pounds of chestnuts every year from Europe. We can grow them just as well here as we can there, as they can there.
Mm-hmm.
Hickory nuts are completely undeveloped. That is a wide open field. Pecans, I talked to a guy this morning. Pecans, he's in Mississippi. He gets $6 a pound for pecans in the shell in Mississippi, where everybody has a pecan tree in their yard.
Oh,
That's not bad.
And he sells out every year.
nice.
And he said, you get outside the pecan belts and you market a little bit and tell people you got them, you can get that much or more. And if you put in a sheller, you can kind of name your price.
Mm-hmm.
So, the guys that want to go out here and do a homestead, or they've got a little piece of land, I mean, you can do this on 5 acres. You don't have to have 100 acres to do this. You can do this on 5 acres. And, how many people have you talked to, well, I bought this place in the country and there's 5 acres, and how can I make money on it? Okay?
Woof.
Well, plant nut trees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because you can't do it with corn, and you can't do it with cattle, and you might can do it with chickens. But, if you're going to go in the produce business, you're going to work yourself nearly to death.
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
I've been doing that a long time. I got the blisters to show for it. But my pecan trees down there are just sitting right there right now, going, how many nuts can I make this year? And they don't require hardly anything from me. There are tasks to do. There are things to do. I'll have to do a little pruning, and I'll have to do a little maintenance, and I've got to mow the grass under them. But we went down there this fall and shook them, and my 11-year-old tree had about 25 pounds of pecans on it. And had I done this when I was younger, I wouldn't need the nursery or anything else. I'd just be able to sell nuts from this 8.5 acres, and I'd be making a pretty good living.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So, it's a really cool thing. Somebody finds a place and it's got a native stand of pecans on it. You can improve those. You can get a crop off of those. The hickory trees. You buy a patch of woods and there's hickory trees in there. You can actually, kind of clear out around them and give them a little room, get them a little sunlight, and they'll produce a whole lot more nuts. And there's a kind of a basic formula in tree production, and that is sunlight equals flowers equals fruit, and in this case equals nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And the more sunlight they get, the more they're going to produce.
That's so encouraging. A lot of what you said is really inspiring. I really like your attitude when it comes to like handing off the torch, and honestly, being a little concerned with how much younger people and people just kind of getting into the natural space care about this kind of stuff or are thinking about it. And I definitely agree with you. There's not enough people thinking about it, and that it is in danger of being lost even more. But I feel really encouraged by a lot of the people that we interact with, being that we are in kind of our own little bubble maybe. But I think the signs that young people are trending towards this direction, that do care about native crops, that care about sustainability or the low input, high output, there's the stuff that just kind of makes sense instead of just continuing to go along with this grind of European standards that don't fit this continent.
I had a gentleman here this fall, and he called me earlier in the year and wanted to plant several acres of pecan trees. And he said, I want to come when the trees are dropping nuts. I want to come see how that works. So he showed up here in November, and the trees were were ripe. The nuts are ripe in October usually, but they don't drop until November. And the trees were ready, and we shook a tree, and the nuts came off, and we stood there, and he picked up about a half a 5-gallon bucket of nuts. And he turned around, and he looked at me, and he said, David, he said, I've run the numbers. He said, I've looked at my land, and he said, I've looked at the cost of putting these in, and I've looked at the value of the crop, and even on the conservative end of the yield. And he said, it just looks like it works really good. He said, why isn't anybody doing this? He said, it just seems like just a lead pipe cinch. Why isn't anybody doing this? And I told him, because nobody told you could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay? So, why don't we have as many people doing intensive produce agriculture? Because nobody told them they could. Now, since I started doing it 25 years ago, there's a whole lot of people doing what I was doing 25 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But 25 years ago, I was in the wild, wild west. I mean, I was doing things, and I was like the Lone Ranger. There was nobody doing what I was doing. And, it was, we were plowing new ground every day because we didn't have anybody to ask. We just had to go figure it out. And, we figured it out. And that there'll be a lot of that with these sorts of crops. When you start doing forest farming and doing, medicinal herbs and, native plants and, native, all this stuff that you and I think are really cool, when you really start trying to be productive at it, there's nobody to ask.
Sure.
You're going to be figuring out. And it's not hard to figure out. You're gonna do your own set of screw ups. You'll learn the hard way.
Sure.
But those lessons are the best lessons because you don't forget those.
100%.
And I know some things that you shouldn't grow in Tennessee. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I tried, it did not work very well.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know some things that grow really, really well in Tennessee, and there's still nobody growing them.
Yeah, and you were the one that found it out, so.
I'm the one that found it out, and, nobody ever asked me, so, I don't guess I'll tell them. Yeah, I mean, the key to this is the growing. The growing is the easy part. The more difficult part is the marketing part, and that's where you just have to do what you and I are doing today. You've got to toot the horn and tell everybody, hey, you can do this. And, if I don't know if you guys have ever just found a pecan in the wild and cracked it open and eaten it. It sounds like you've done that with a hickory nut. And, it borders on a religious experience when you get a good one because it's so good.
I haven't had the pleasure of eating a pecan nut that I found in the wild, but I do have the fortune of living pretty much right next to the Morton Arboretum, which is pretty world-recognized arboretum, and they have a northern, like a cold hardy pecan tree there. And while I didn't crack the nut, I will say that the outer shell smelled heavenly. It smelled sweet and vanilla, and I would just I kept it in my car for weeks because I would just grab it and just huff it. It's so good.
I don't think I ever talked to anybody that huffed pecan. But I guess
Not yet, you have.
Yeah, there you go. First for everything.
Well, we've got all these different varieties growing here so that we can cut graftwood for our nursery, and we've got one here called Norton. It has a fairly thick shell. It's a big old nut, but it probably would make it pretty close to as far north as y'all are. And we cracked one of them open, and we were tasting the different nuts. This year it had a kind of a maple syrup overtone to it.
Ooh.
Man, this sounds awesome.
I'm a big sucker for maple flavor. Yes.
But it was subtle, but it was there, and like a good almond has got an amaretto overtone to it. Does it taste like a shot of amaretto? No, it doesn't. But it does have that. It does have that. You taste.
Yeah, it's definitely in the same neighborhood for sure.
That sense of amaretto yelling from the other room.
Yeah, and it's but these fresh nuts they've got aromatics in them that you taste in your nose.
Yes.
They've got oil in them, a high oil content, so you get a good mouthfeel. They've got a texture to them, so they're not dry and crunchy like the store-bought pecans are. They have a softer feel to them. And then when you cook with them, that all of those flavors come out so much more into. One of my guys made a pecan pie the other day for me for my birthday. That's the best pecan pie I ever ate in my life. It's made out of pecans that we raised here on the farm.
That's awesome.
And I'm not saying this to try to. I mean, it really is the best pecan pie I ever had.
I believe it.
And it's but it's because. And that's what I tell people who are, they're growing these things, and they're like, well, how am I going to sell them? I'm like, well, you let somebody try them.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've never had a fresh pecan, you've never had a good pecan.
Wow.
The ones at the store are okay. And a lot of people like them as okay, but wait till you get a hold of a good one.
No
and
kidding.
Hickory nuts are the same way. How many people do you know who are not foragers who have ever had a hickory nut or even know that you can eat them?
0%.
Yeah, none.
So we've got this whole educational process that we've got to go through to say, hey, here, try this and see what you think.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what to do with that. Well, you do anything you do with any other nut with that.
Sure, yeah. Some people seem so bewildered, and it really is just trying to draw these parallels between, the physical forms and their flavors. Nuts, you use the same way as you use any nut.
Yeah.
Fruits, you use the same way as you would any other fruit. It's. I think people there's a lot of fear and overcomplication, and just worry that you won't be equipped with enough information from the start. And like you were saying, sometimes you just got to get out there and get messy safely. Don't eat poisonous stuff, but get messy.
I've eaten some terrible things. Okay, I mean,
me too.
Yeah, same.
I just did this weekend.
I had a chef come up here one time. We had a persimmon tree in the backyard, and it was like late September. It was cool, but it wasn't. It certainly was not persimmon time.
Mm-hmm.
And one had fallen on the ground and was soft, but it certainly was not ripe. And he said, "Oh, I've heard that persimmons are so good." And before I could say it, that one's probably not ready yet, or in his mouth. And he was standing there going, "Why did you let me do this?" I said, "You didn't give me time to say, hey, you probably shouldn't." But, and a lot of people have that experience with persimmons.
Mm-hmm.
They plopped one in their mouth before it was ready. And, if you wait 3 more weeks and you get one that's actually ripe, it is absolutely spectacular. And, that is some of what we're, that's what we're dealing with in foraging and whatnot is, some things are very, very edible when they're ready, and they're very, very inedible when they're not.
Yeah, and that window can be of varying size, usually a pretty small window.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, pawpaws are ripe for a day or two.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then they're either over or under, and under is really bad, and over is not very good either.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're ripe and they're good, they're really, really good.
It's one of the best, yeah. Well, David, I feel like I'm cutting this a little short, honestly. We've been going on for almost an hour now, and it's been awesome to have you on. We're definitely going to have you back, but we definitely got to close the episode for today. Do you know whenever you have like your nursery regularly opens back up so people can reach out to you about getting some plants?
Oh, we ship mail order. We ship all over the country. You can order it anytime at rockbridgetrees.com. And we have a pretty good selection of plants right now. If we're sold out of something, we do have a waiting list, and you can get on that, and you can, as soon as we get it back in stock again, we can let you know, and you get the first shot at it. And we've been doing this about 15 years, and eventually we're going to figure out what we're doing.
I love that. It's been such a blast talking to you, man. We're definitely, I want to make a plan in the next week or so. We can get back with you and have you back on to talk about grafting and different techniques and all that stuff in a few months, back when spring rolls around.
Yeah, I also want the origin stories. I want to know what got you into all this stuff. But,
Shoot, yeah,
but
you
we'll
know
save
what?
that for next
Yeah.
time. We'll save that for next time. A little teaser for the
It's
listeners.
not about him, man. It's the plants. No, we love learning about the people involved with the plants too.
Okay. Well, yeah, all that sounds like fun. I'd be happy to be on again.
Cool,
Excellent.
man. It's been so much fun. I hope you have a great rest of your week and stay warm down there in Tennessee, man.
All right, we'll do our best.
All right, thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Farmer Dave.
David frickin' Hughes, man. What a
Wow.
guy.
That was cool.
It was cool.
I had so much fun listening to him talk. I felt like a lot of our guests, we just have so much fun and could just talk to them for hours. This one went on a little bit longer than planned, but he was so good. He seemed like...
And that was cutting it short, man. I feel like we could have done that forever.
Seriously. And he seemed like he didn't have any experience with being interviewed.
Yeah,
Man's
yeah,
a champion.
It was so good. Yeah. I feel like I asked like half of a question.
Yeah.
You know? But so like next time I definitely want to get into the, what made him start doing all that stuff.
Yeah, we definitely got to have him back. He's a very interesting character, and yeah, we definitely missed some of the more main target bullet points of what we usually ask our guests, just because we kept getting carried away with the
Trees for bees,
trees.
man. We didn't touch on that. Trees for bees. That's
Oh
kinda
my
like
gosh.
Kind of like his little slogan. I know. I'm so
so much.
Next time.
Holy
next
crap,
time.
Steve, you got to keep me on
Next
track. man.
time.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, we got to move on. So,
Yeah. Ta-ta.
cheers, guys. Love you guys. Thanks for listening. Wowie wow! We've got a new hot sauce for you.
It's so delicious.
It's spicy.
It's spicier for sure.
Spicier. It's called Harvest Moon, made with ghost peppers, American persimmons,
and spice bush berry.
It's gonna be great. We also have t-shirts available. Brand new t-shirts.
The best t-shirts, I think.
Baseball tees.
Scrumpers United.
If you've collected apples, if you've collected fruit, you're
Welcome to the club.
You're welcome to a club. You're a scrumper. So check out our merch store, wildedibleworldpod.myshopify.com. Wowie wow!